You know, when you think about buildings infrastructure, you generally think about things you can easily get to, like uh, a leaky pipe under your kitchen sink.
Right, yeah, you just open the cabinet, grab a wrench, and tighten it.
Exactly. Or, a flickering light in the hallway. You pull over a chair, change the bulb. There's this, I don't know, a psychological comfort in that visibility.
It's forgiving. I mean, if something goes wrong, the problem usually presents itself clearly, and the solution is physically right there in front of you. You aren't, destroying your house just to diagnose the issue.
Yeah, but then you step into the world of underfloor electrical heating, and suddenly that accessibility completely vanishes.
Oh, totally. It's gone.
We're talking about taking a live, high-voltage electrical system, laying it out across a floor, and then literally burying it under tons of liquid concrete or solid mortar.
It is the ultimate construction commitment. Once that concrete is poured or those ceramic tiles are set, there is no going back.
No going back at all.
Right. If you made a mistake on day one, the only troubleshooting tool you have left is a jackhammer.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
And it's exactly why our mission for this deep dive today is decoding this massive stack of highly technical manufacturer installation manuals and user guides for electric heating cables.
Because you really don't want to be using that jackhammer.
Exactly. If you're renovating a bathroom, or if you ever just wondered how these hidden grids actually function, we're going to distill this dense material into the ultimate guide.
Sounds good. Let's get into it.
We are focusing on three critical pillars today. First, the non-negotiable safety rules for buried electricity. Second, physical mechanics, the exact math of spacing your cables. And third, a practical step-by-step checklist to avoid mistakes that could, cost you your entire floor.
Right, because when you're engineering a system that you can never touch again, you don't get to guess. You calculate and you follow the parameters to the letter.
So let's start with those parameters. Before you even think about laying a single wire on the floor, you have to establish the electrical boundaries. Dealing with high-voltage electricity buried under your feet means, well, safety isn't just a suggestion.
No, it's the law of the system.
But looking through these manuals, I noticed some very specific jargon. For example, they insist every system must be connected to an RCD with a strict limit of 30 milliamps. What exactly is that?
Yeah, so an RCD is a residual current device. Think of it as a highly sensitive safety net. It constantly monitors the electrical current going into the floor and the current coming back out.
Okay.
And if those two numbers don't match exactly, it means electricity is leaking somewhere it shouldn't be, potentially into a person.
Wow.
Yeah, and that 30 milliamp limit is standard because that is the threshold of current that can cause a human heart to go into fibrillation. It shuts the system down instantly.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. But there was an asterisk in the manual. It said you could go up to 300 milliamps in certain industrial setups because of something called capacitive leakage. What does that actually mean?
It's actually a fascinating quirk of electrical physics. So when you have incredibly long heating cables laid out over a massive area like a warehouse, the cable and the ground can accidentally act like a giant capacitor.
Wait, really? Just naturally?
Yeah, naturally. They build up a tiny electrostatic charge between them. It's not a dangerous leak, but the system mimics one.
Oh, I see.
Right, so if you use a standard 30 milliamp RCD on a massive warehouse floor, that natural capacitance will just constantly trip the breaker, turning your heating off for literally no reason.
That sounds incredibly annoying.
It is. So in those specific industrial cases, they allow a 300 milliamp buffer just to prevent that nuisance tripping.
That clarifies things immensely. Now, beyond the RCD, the manuals list other required safeguards. They mention the metallic screen wrapping the cable has to be connected to an earth terminal and an all-pole disconnection switch.
Right, to pause on that switch for a second. An all-pole switch means it mechanically breaks both the live wire and the neutral wire at the very same time.
So it completely severs the connection.
Exactly. It ensures that when you turn the system off for maintenance, there is zero chance of any stray voltage lingering in the circuit. It's a total physical disconnect from the grid.
Got it. Now, moving down the power line, the manuals give us these specific requirements for fuse sizing, which is based on the thickness of the wires.
Yes, the cold leads.
Right, the cold leads. So that's the non-heating power wire that runs up your wall to the thermostat. It says if your cold lead is 1.5 square millimeters thick, you're restricted to a 10 or 13 amp fuse. But if you upgrade to a thicker 2.5 square millimeter lead, you can use a 16 or 20 amp fuse. Why such strict matching?
It all comes down to thermal limits. If you tried to push 20 amps of electrical current through a thin 1.5 millimeter wire, that wire it cannot handle the flow.
Like a traffic jam.
Exactly. It experiences too much friction, essentially acting like a heating element itself.
Hmm.
The wire will melt the insulation inside your drywall before the 20 amp fuse ever realizes there's a problem.
Oh, wow. So matching the fuse to the wire gauge ensures the breaker trips before the wire physically melts inside your wall,
Spot on.
which transitions perfectly into the overall thermal limits of the room itself. The safety rules dictate exactly how much heat you are legally allowed to generate, measured in watts per square meter. And it changes drastically depending on your foundation.
It really does.
Yeah, like if you are laying these cables over a wooden subfloor, your absolute ceiling is 100 watts per square meter.
Right, because wood is an excellent thermal insulator, but more importantly, it's combustible.
Yeah, obviously.
So if you pump 150 or 200 watts into wood, the heat doesn't dissipate quickly enough, it gets trapped, and the structural integrity of the wood degrades over time, creating a very real fire hazard hidden under your floorboards.
But the manuals say if you are on a concrete subfloor, you can literally double that output to 200 watts per square meter.
Yes, but there's a catch.
Right. You must have at least 3 centimeters of concrete covering the heating element.
Because concrete has a massive thermal capacity, it can absorb and distribute that higher heat load safely. But that 3 centimeter rule is vital.
Because if it's too thin,
If your concrete pour is too thin, it lacks the mass to spread the heat out. The concrete directly above the cable will expand drastically faster than the cooler areas between the cables.
and it cracks.
Worse than cracks, your brand new floor will basically shatter under the thermal stress.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Think of heating cables as a building's hidden nervous system. If you overwhelm it with too much current or surround it with materials that can't handle the energy, the whole system short circuits.
That's a great way to look at it.
But here is something else that really jumped out from the documentation. There is an aggressive, almost obsessive focus on warning labels.
Oh, yeah. Very strict.
The manual demands you put caution signs in the fuse box, you mark the power connection fittings, trace along the circuit line, put formal notes in the electrical plans. Why is there such an aggressive focus on this if the system is completely hidden?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you're hitting on the core hazard of buried infrastructure. By making it hidden, you inherently create a trap for future renovations.
The trap.
Yeah, imagine 10 years from now, a new homeowner decides to bolt a heavy safe to the floor, or a plumber needs to jackhammer a section to fix a pipe.
They have zero visual cue that there's a live electrical grid 2 inches below the tile.
And that's how people get electrocuted. They need those warnings in the fuse box before they ever touch a tool. Without that documentation, they risk drilling a steel bit straight into a live 230-volt cable.
So the safety rules here are about protecting the environment and the people 10 or 20 years down the line.
Exactly. You're protecting the future environment, not just the current installation.
The documentation is basically a map through a minefield for the next contractor.
Well put.
I also noticed the manuals outline specific environmental classifications. They talk about M1 classified cables and explicitly warn never use M1 cables in areas with high mechanical loads.
Right. So the M stands for mechanical strength. And M1 classification means the cable is designed for light duty, like sitting peacefully inside a bathroom floor.
Right.
You would never put an M1 cable outdoors, in roof gutters, or tie it to steel reinforcing grids. It physically lacks the heavy-duty armor to survive being stepped on by construction boots or crushed by sharp stones in a heavy concrete pour.
Okay, so if you know your electrical limits and you know you can't push more than 100 watts into that wooden floor, how do you physically arrange the cable to guarantee you don't cross that line?
That brings us to the spacing.
Right, Section 2, the Goldilocks zone of cable spacing.
In the industry, they refer to this as the CC distance, or the center-to-center distance. It is the exact measurement from the middle of one cable run to the middle of the adjacent cable run.
And getting your CC distance right
Yeah.
is the holy grail of even heat distribution, right? Avoiding cold spots.
Exactly.
The manual gives a specific mathematical formula for this. You essentially take the total area of the floor in square meters, multiply by 100, and divide by the length of the cable in meters. Or you can calculate it based on your target wattage. But honestly, here's where it gets really interesting for me. I like to think of this using a watering the lawn analogy.
Oh, I like that. How so?
Well, imagine you are installing pop-up sprinklers in your yard. If you place the sprinkler heads too far apart, the arcs of water don't overlap and you get these dead, dry, brown spots in your grass.
Right.
But if you panic and group the sprinklers too close together, you completely flood the lawn and turn it into a muddy swamp.
That perfectly illustrates the thermodynamics at play. What's fascinating here is that if your CC distance is too wide, you end up with cold spots on your floor. If it's too tight, you create concentrated hot spots.
And those hot spots can overheat the system or damage the flooring above.
Exactly, and there are strict spacing rules governing this placement. Any obstacles, like a drain or a pipe, need a clearance of at least half the CC distance. And under absolutely no circumstances can the heating elements ever cross or touch each other.
Because if they touch, you are instantly doubling the heat density at that exact microscopic point.
Yes, it will literally melt its own protective insulation arc and short out entirely.
Now, applying your lawn sprinkler analogy to a massive scale, the manufacturer manuals actually provide specs for outdoor football fields.
Oh yes, the football pitch applications.
And wild to think about, we are talking about keeping an entire professional soccer pitch thawed, soft, and green in the dead of winter.
For a project like that, the CC distance is typically tight, around 15 to 25 centimeters. But the golden rule for sports fields is that the CC distance must be equal to or less than the installation depth.
And the manual recommends burying the cables 25 to 30 centimeters deep.
Right, to protect them from the massive tractors and aerators they use to maintain the turf.
Okay, so spacing has to be less than the depth. Why?
Because of how heat radiates. Heat doesn't just rise in a straight line. It radiates outward from the cable in the shape of a cone, widening as it gets closer to the surface.
Okay.
So if you bury a cable 30 centimeters down, but you space the cables 40 centimeters apart.
Your cones of heat won't overlap by the time they hit the surface.
Exactly. You will end up looking at a football field with literal stripes of frozen, snowy grass alternating with stripes of thawed green grass.
That would be a disaster on TV.
Total disaster. So by ensuring the spacing is tighter than the depth, those thermal cones merge deep underground, creating one continuous, solid plane of warmth by the time it reaches the root system of the grass.
Wow. From keeping grass warm, the manuals take us to the extreme opposite. Cold stores, industrial freezers. At first glance, putting heating cables inside a freezer sounds like a typo.
It does seem contradictory, but they aren't there to heat the room. They are there to prevent a phenomenon called frost heave.
Frost heave?
Yeah. If you run a massive industrial freezer at minus 30 degrees Celsius, 2047, that intense cold eventually penetrates through the floor insulation and deep into the actual earth below the foundation.
Oh, wow.
And over months and years, the groundwater in the soil freezes into massive ice lenses.
And as we know, water expands when it freezes.
With enough force to lift a building, frost heave can literally buckle the entire concrete foundation of a warehouse upward, completely destroying the structure.
So they bury heating cables deep in the subfloor, purely to keep the ground dirt barely above freezing.
Yes, just enough to stop the ice.
The manual states that for these cold stores, the absolute maximum spacing is 50 centimeters, but they emphasize a preferred CC distance of 33 centimeters. Why 33 specifically?
It provides a foolproof rule of thumb for contractors. A 33 centimeter CC distance means you are installing precisely 3 meters of heating cable for every 1 square meter of floor space.
Ah, so it removes the complex algebra from the job site.
Exactly. It makes purchasing materials incredibly straightforward. Also, because digging up a warehouse foundation is literally impossible, the manual mandates installing a secondary identical reserve system right next to the main one. Complete redundancy.
Because you cannot afford a failure when the structural integrity of a whole building is on the line.
Right.
Now, we've talked about flat surfaces, but the manual also covers pipes, keeping water pipes from bursting in winter. And I have to admit, looking at the formula they provide for spiral wrapping a pipe, it looks like advanced calculus.
It really does.
It involves pi, multiplying the outer diameter, taking the square root of cable lines squared minus 1.
Yeah, we can definitely skip reciting the algebra. The concept behind that formula is what matters. When you wrap a pipe, you can't just coil the wire loosely. The math dictates the absolute perfect pitch of the spiral based on the thickness of the pipe. It ensures you have enough heat distribution to keep the water flowing, but it prevents you from wrapping it so tightly that you waste expensive cable or create overlapping hot spots.
And you have to use specific materials to attach it to the pipe, right?
Yes, the manual specifies using aluminum tape. You secure the cable at intervals, and the tape actually helps distribute the heat along the pipe.
Which brings us nicely to Section 3, the ultimate installation checklist.
The survival guide.
Exactly. You have your blueprints, you've done your spacing math. Now you are the contractor physically kneeling on the subfloor. How do you actually survive the physical installation without ruining the materials?
It begins before you unspool anything. The foundation must be surgically clean. Any sharp object, an errant nail, or even a jagged stone can nick the cable jacket and compromise the insulation.
The manual also heavily insists on drawing a physical sketch. You have to map exactly where the cold leads are, where the sensors are placed, where the connection boxes are, and you have to leave that sketch in the fuse box.
Because, as we discussed, once the concrete is poured, you are flying blind. You need a treasure map if you ever need to troubleshoot a sensor.
That makes sense. There are also strict temperature limits for the physical labor. The manual states you should not install these cables in environments colder than -5 degrees Celsius.
Right, because the internal components and the plastic jacketing become rigid in freezing temperatures. If you try to unroll and bend a freezing cable around a corner, the internal wire could easily snap.
But the manual offers a workaround. It says you can briefly connect the cable to the mains power for a few minutes, so it generates its own heat and softens up. But it adds a massive, bolded warning. The cable must be completely unrolled before you do this.
Yes, this is a classic rookie mistake. If you power up a heating cable while it is still tightly coiled on its shipping spool, the heat has nowhere to dissipate.
So it just bakes itself.
Exactly. The center of the spool acts like an oven, and the cable will melt its own insulation into a solid, useless block of plastic in minutes.
Okay, so the cable is soft. You are laying it out. And here's where we hit the absolute golden rule of underfloor heating. The manual repeats this commandment multiple times.
Yes, it does.
During installation, you never, ever, under any circumstances, cut or shorten the heating cable.
To be precise, you can cut the fiberglass mesh backing on a heating mat if you need to turn a corner, but you never take a pair of wire cutters to the actual colored heating wire.
See, this is where I want to push back, because this feels incredibly counterintuitive for anyone who has done DIY work.
How so?
If I'm running speaker wire in my living room and I reach the end of the room and I have 3 extra meters of cable, I just snip the end off. Why can't I do that here? If the room is finished, why is it a federal offense to just cut it and cap it?
This raises an important question, and to answer it, we have to look at the physics of resistive heating. A heating cable is not like a garden hose where you can just chop off the end and the water flows out exactly the same.
Okay.
And it's not like conductive speaker wire, which is designed to let electricity flow as easily as possible.
Right. Heating cables are designed to fight the electricity.
Exactly. A heating cable is a highly calibrated resistor. The heat you feel on your feet is generated by electrical current fighting against the physical resistance of that wire, and the total resistance of the circuit is based entirely on its length.
So if I take wire cutters and chop 3 meters off the end of my cable,
You are fundamentally rewiring the physics of the floor. By making the cable shorter, you are drastically lowering the total electrical resistance of that circuit.
and according to Ohm's law, if you lower the resistance on a fixed 230-volt house supply, the electrical current just floods in. Think of it like a traffic jam on a highway. If you suddenly remove 3 miles of bumper-to-bumper cars, the remaining cars are going to floor it and speed up massively.
That's a great way to visualize it. Lower resistance means a higher